I'm going to ask my friend Tim to come up here. Now, I don't know Tim real well, but I know his mom real well. We've been friends for years and years, and I've always had much been very impressed with you and your family. So we're going to get to know you a little better this morning. Tim,
Okay.
introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Tim Landis. My mom, Juanita Landis. I was her firstborn, and
Of a family of like
a
five.
family of five,
The
six
oldest.
actually, yeah, but five. And things went so well with me that she decided to keep on having more kids.
Wow. Such a good experience with that firstborn.
Yeah.
I have a firstborn that would say the same thing. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So I was actually born in the States, down in Pennsylvania, and lived down there for the first 10 months of my life. So I'm a Yankee, and
Right on. Oh dear.
yeah, I
feel
got
sorry for you.
both sides of the border here. So yeah, I was born down there, moved up here when I was about 10 months old, and lived up here. So basically, all my life, all that I can remember was from around the Bancroft area here. Yeah, grew up in. My dad was a school teacher, carpenter, and then he started Landis Fruit Market. So
So all that lovely produce and bread is all because of your dad.
yeah.
He started that.
Yeah. Yeah, so then I was, my dad died when I was just turned 17. So I took on the whole looking after the family and market and everything. So
That's a lot at 17.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
met a wonderful woman from Montreal when I was 18.
Wow.
And we started dating when I was 20, got married, and now we got four kids. And I think maybe they would say, at least Tyler would say the same thing as me, that everything went so well with him, and
Just kept having kids.
yeah, until the last one, and then the last one was like, nope, no more. That's
am-
not true, Haley. You're wonderful.
I am the last one in my family too. So.
Good.
All right. So you have had some mountains in your life, but you've had some valleys in your life. We've already heard of a major valley, losing your dad at 17. So what was your initial reaction to a major blow in your life? He died, I believe, of cancer, right? So I don't know if you had a lot of time to digest that before he passed, but some of the valleys that you've had in your life. What's your initial what's your innate reaction? Because I think we all have sort of innate reactions. Some of us burrow and hide. Some of us become a victim. We all do different things.
Yeah, for me, I was just a new Christian at the time when my dad died, and I clung to that verse where in the Bible where it says, if you have faith, the grain of a mustard seed, that everything's possible. And I took that literally, and I didn't believe even the night that my dad died. We were called to the hospital. He couldn't breathe. He was kind of bent forward, just trying to breathe, and he took his oxygen mask off and he said, "Good night, son."
Wow.
And that to me was like, Dad, God's with us. He's not going to die. You're not going to die. And I held on to that and just watched him basically suffocate to death. And after he was gone, that was just like coming off the mountain. And for me, it was like you're on the edge, walking this sketchy little rock trail, and believing that you're not going to fall. And God said, "No, that's not what I have for you," And that rock let go under my foot, and I crashed to the bottom. And laying there in the bottom, shock probably was my first reaction. Almost instant anger, not believing in God anymore. not believing that he had my back, that he had anything or wanted anything good for me.
Right.
And just it was so easy at that point to fill my mind with, you're on your own. Nobody has your back. God is somewhere out there, and he might have some good for someone, but for me, no. So that was my first reaction.
So we've been talking in our series about the wilderness, and the wilderness being what you've touched on a little bit, being like there's a valley when these things, happen, but then there's a wilderness when it goes on and on and on, and you feel like God is not listening to any of your prayers. So in the wilderness, what saved you from quitting? Because I think a lot of us want to quit in the wilderness. So what saved you from quitting?
I kind of through the years after that, and at that point when Dad died, I thought I was in the bottom. I thought that was the lowest part of the valley. It turns out it wasn't, and I had to deal with a lot of things, other things, personal, family issues that a lot of the little bit of faith I had left in the world, in people, not God, but people, was basically shattered, taken away from me. And that put me in a spot where I just wanted to be alone. I would, I would react around people. I would react with or interact with people, but I was in the wilderness, and I didn't want to come out. I was there, just wandering around, and totally content just to live my just basic do the bare minimum to make it through life. And what saved, that was the question, what saved you from that?
What saved you from that sort of innate reaction of just wanting to burrow down and be by yourself and isolate?
Yeah, I think it was just the fact that my wife was one of the ones that was pushing me. She was she wouldn't let me go, and she wouldn't let me stay in the wilderness, and she just kind of pushed me on to find help, to keep on going.
So in the wilderness, the one week we talked about building wells. So digging wells, and not that they are initially filled because it's a desert and it's dry and it feels hopeless, but that we build wells. And how, did you build any wells in that wilderness? I mean, you had a family and you were in community with your family, so that was a bit of a well that your wife beautifully filled. So you've spoke of one incident, but how did God fill your wells, or did you dig any wells in the wilderness?
I did have some wells, and through my wilderness experience, I did find some wells, because for me it was, okay, I'm at the bottom, and the times when I would want to climb back up onto the mountain, because everybody loves the life on the top, and I would try climbing, and it was just like a straight rock wall, and I would get up so far, and then I would just fall back down. And every time I would fall back down, it would just hurt me worse. I would get more bruised up. I would get more hurt. And then so my wife was encouraging me. She's like, come on, you can't do it yourself. You gotta find someone. And I went and I found a well, so to speak, and people that were where I was before, or where they used to be where I was, and being able to ask for help, and getting letting them help me. As far as the wells, when you think of climbing the mountain And when I think of climbing the mountain, when I was thinking about this, I kind of thought of a couple years ago when me and my family were out in British Columbia. We wanted to climb a mountain and get up to a glacier. And when, of course, we were in the bottom, we had to start out in the valley. And as we started climbing, it was a lot of work. And it was exhausting. And the trail was narrow and small. And it was like little toe holds, and you had to go over through where avalanches had taken all the trees out and walk on God knows how many feet of snow. And there's just these tiny little like ledges you had to walk on. And just as we climbed that hill or that mountain, I had to think how many people put effort into making this trail to get us to our destination at the top. And how many hours of labor put in with axe and picks and shovels and that kind of thing. And so that for me, that I'm kind of a visual guy, so I like to think of stuff like that, of climbing up the mountain. You have the wells in the bottom, which you can take nutrients and water from. But then you got to go up the mountain and work on that trail so you can get up to the top again. And so building trail, following the trail that others have built, I think for me is just as important as the wells in the bottom.
So a lot more difficult if you were doing that by yourself, right? So your sense of community, I mean, I know that some of those toe holds. Sorry, it's really Christmas. I'm really tired. Toe holds was like the prayers of your mother, because I know she prayed her face off for you, right? Yeah. As a friend of hers. So some of those toe holds were the prayers of your mother, right? And what were the other things? What were all the little things that helped you up? And that's just an example of one of the toe holds was the prayers of your praying mom, right?
Yeah, that was one. The prayers of those around me, the prayers of my wife, and the few people around that knew what I was going through. The other big help was actually finding a group and actually believing and understanding that there's been many people where I was, and that I can have some faith and trust in them again, and that they have went through this, and that they can help me get through it, get back up onto the mountaintop. Yep. That was a big one.
Knowing that you're not alone.
Knowing that I'm not alone. Also, all the wisdom, the patience, understanding that I had to develop when I was in the valley. The strength that the valley gives you, you can't get from the mountaintop.
So when Steve said a comment like you can't have mountains without valleys, what's your reaction to something like that? A comment like that, an annoying comment like that?
I almost started crying. I almost teared up back there, because when you think of it, when you're down in the valley, it is the most painful thing that you can think of. And others around might not see your pain. They might not see what you're going through. But God put you there for a purpose. And He is trying to teach you. And the longer that we, as people, try to numb that pain, try to take all those painkillers and do anything and everything that we can to not feel, the longer we're going to stay there.
We're really good at that too, as a humanity.
We're the best at it.
Yeah.
We can find everything and anything that we can do not to be in pain. And so when he said that statement, that I could feel that pain, and there's so many around that are in the valley and in the pain, but God does have a plan. He does have a plan, and His plan is definitely a lot better than we could ever think ours is.
So when the comment again was shared that your greatest gift could be some of those painful moments and those valleys, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah.
Like your wilderness experience could be the one of the greatest gifts in your life. how do you react to something like that?
Yeah, it is. It is. It is, because when I was a young Christian, I latched onto the verse. I should have looked it up where it was, but there's a verse in the Bible that talks about a tree that's planted by the water, and that it's like, big and strong. But what I didn't realize was all the storms and all the droughts and all the, high water and everything that tree has to go through to be strong. And if we're always on the mountaintop and we never have to go down and learn new skills, learn patience, endure the pain, understand what God has for us, that we won't be a very strong person. And you'll always be, basically on the surface. And what the valleys do is gives us character, and it gives us insight, not only into our lives, but into those around us. And so I would have to say I absolutely agree with that, because the fact that, I was there, and I have the insight to be a help to others that are in the valley at the same time.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this morning, and we really appreciate you giving us a little bit of insight into your experience with this. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thanks so much, guys. That was amazing just to hear Tim's story. Let's pray. Father, thank you for who you are, and that you are with us wherever we find ourselves. I guess part of that is we have to invite you in to where we are. And I pray that we would do that you desire to be with us on the mountain. You want to be with us in the valley. You want to be with us wherever we are. Your desire is that we would know you and you would know us. And I pray that we would capture that we would look for that we would experience that. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, let's just keep going. So we're in this series, God With Us. Steve has been leading us through the last couple of weeks, and it actually started like 4 weeks ago, and then we had the kids program last week. So, and I have found there have been a lot of things that have been said throughout that have really kind of captured my attention, that have made me pause and think. All right, and among those was Dave Coulis was up here with Tim Green. They were doing a back and forth interview, and Dave said that it feels much better to be in the dark when you know you're not alone in the dark. All right? And the idea, however you picture that, maybe it's, staying over at a friend's place or something, and as a kid, parents made you turn the lights out and you could talk back and forth. And it's so much easier than being alone in the dark, is when you know that somebody's there, right? It kind of makes the darkness disappear a little bit. And then as I was thinking about that even more, what's even better than that is when there is somebody with you in the dark who can see through the darkness. That's even better, right? When you are with somebody who can see the things that you can't see, right? And can tell you that things are going to be okay. That's our experience with God. The idea that we're not alone, that God is with us if we invite him in, and he can see everything around us even when we can't see it. That is the experience that God invites us into with him. Over the last few weeks, we've been focusing on this passage, and it's pulled out of Isaiah. It's repeated in Matthew. It says, look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. What does it mean for God to be with us? And Steve talked about being in the valleys. You may enjoy God on the mountaintops, but we get to know him intimately in the valleys. And that's exactly what Tim was just talking about. And then the other thing was this. Your deepest need becomes a gift when it drives you to depend on God. The idea of being in the wilderness. And if you read through Scripture, have you noticed when God speaks to somebody, he often whispers? Right? In the Old Testament, as it's describing, someone wanted to experience God, so God placed him in this cleft in the rock, and there was a storm that passed by, and that wasn't where God was. And there was torrents and raging wind, and that wasn't where God was. And then when all that disappeared, there was this whisper, and that was God. And you know why God speaks in whispers? It's because he's that close. He is that close that he needs to whisper. That is what it is to have God with us. He is so close that if he didn't whisper, he would blow out our eardrums. This week, we're going to talk about how God is with us in the storms. It's been said in life that you are either in a storm or you are just leaving a storm or you are entering a storm. You know, that's how life goes. We have kind of a messed up theology about what it is to be with Jesus. We may go, you know what? I think I must be living properly because everything is going well in my life. Right? My investments are doing great. I have a great job. My family's doing wonderful. There is no sickness in my world. I must be living well. And that is absolutely opposite to what we see when God is moving in the lives of people in the New Testament. Here's the thing. What we start to think is when there is a storm coming in, we go, okay, where is God? Where is God? There isn't supposed to be a storm in my life if I am doing what is right. If I'm doing what God has told me to do, why am I not being rewarded with palm trees and sunshine? And then what we start to mess up in our thinking is that we think that God isn't with us. But what we need to understand is that we should never let the presence of a storm cause you to doubt the presence of God. Never let the presence of a storm cause you to doubt the presence of God. But our natural reaction to a storm is, okay, I must do something wrong, or where is God? I need to fix what I'm doing so this storm disappears. But the story of God is not about avoiding the storm. The story of God is about experiencing God in the presence of a storm. That is what we are called to do, that God is with us in the storm. God doesn't take us out of the storm, because storms are a part of life. And they always will be. In Scripture, there's a story in Acts 27. And if you've been reading through the Bible, if you've been reading through the Bible recap, you would have read through this not too long ago, or maybe you're about to read through it, doesn't matter. But it's about the story of Paul. In the last part of Acts, it talks about how Saul or Paul, he was this persecutor of the church. He was arresting people who were following Jesus, and that was his whole motivation. He has this encounter with the Holy Spirit on this road where there's a bright light and God speaks to him directly. It changes his life. The persecutor of the church becomes the promoter of the church. He does it as vigorously as he had persecuted. He spends his entire life promoting Jesus, talking about how Jesus is the way. And if you're reading about that, he goes to the Gentile nations, proclaims Jesus, and there is this whole group of people who are saying, if you're going to be a Christian, then you need to abide by Jewish tradition, by Jewish laws, by the Old Testament. And Paul is saying, no, that's not. That's not it. This is new. And so Paul has been promoting. He and Barnabas go to Jerusalem. They meet with the leaders of the church. The leaders of the church send a letter with them saying, yeah, you know what, Gentiles, you don't need to abide by Jewish regulations. But not everybody buys into that. And Paul shows up in Jerusalem, and there's this uproar, this riot, where the governor ends up arresting Paul to protect his life, sends him off to Caesarea, and Paul spends a couple of years in prison in Caesarea. You want a valley? I mean, Paul has left everything wrong in his life and moved towards everything right in his life, and he is persecuted and he is imprisoned for 2 years, awaiting a trial. It's not just, and it's not fair. But it is the life of one of the greatest examples of what it is to follow Jesus for us. And so they make a decision. Paul appeals to Caesar while he's in Caesarea, which means that they need to ship him off to Italy, to Rome. They send him on a ship with some other prisoners. And while they're going there, it's late in the year, and they get into some storms. And as the centurion that is leading them takes them on different ships, and they end up on this very large ship, 267 people on this ship. And when you think about that at, year 64 AD, this has got to be a massive ship. Not a ship like, Carnival Cruises or anything, but it's still a big boat. And this ship goes out, and they get caught up in this storm. And Paul is with them, and Luke is with them as well, the one who is writing this. He says, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. Does that describe your storms? I've been there. I've been there where it has just felt awful that, whatever your storm is, what is your storm? Like there are physical storms going on. Our friends in Cuba are experiencing the aftermath of a devastating storm. The residue of this storm, or the residual effects of this storm in Cuba, when the roofs blew off of their houses and the rain poured in and all their mattresses got wet, now they're dealing with mold. They're dealing with loss of food. They're dealing, when the power went out, everything that they had preserved in their refrigerators, it's all gone bad. Storms carry on after the storm is even gone. There is residual effect to that. And Paul, as he is out in this storm, whatever your experience has been, where you're just kind of overwhelmed because there's something going on and you just can't get out from under it. If it's short term, you can kind of build up enough adrenaline or whatever you need to do, or determination to get through. But what happens when it just continues on? When you can't get out from under that cloud, when you can't get out of the storm? when we read about this occasion, they were out in the water being pushed around by the winds in this storm on this ancient ship for 14 days. I mean, I can say it and it doesn't seem like much. I've been out on the water with a motor that wouldn't start for like half a day, and that felt like an eternity. And that's not with storm raging down on me, right? 14 days. When they had been out there, they finally just gave up hope. They just gave up. Have you been there? I bet there's been some experience in your life where you felt like that. Maybe your storm is a divorce. Maybe your storm is relational. Maybe your storm is financial. Maybe your storm is whatever it is. I think it's easy for us to get wrapped up in financial storms, right? I think it's easier for us to look at our finances and go, well, this is hopeless. There's no way that I'm going to recover from this. Paul, in the middle of the storm, just another caveat is that before they set off to sail, Paul said, this isn't going to go well. We shouldn't go out in this because there's going to be loss of ship and lives and everything else. Paul is telling the centurion this. He's telling the people he's traveling with. He's saying we shouldn't go, and they decided to go anyway. So here's what you got to love about Paul. This is what he says. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, men, you should have taken my advice. Don't you hate Paul now? You're out in a storm? I told you so. Should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. I told you so. Here's the thing about storms. Is that if a storm blindsides me, right? Like if it's not my fault. You know, maybe your parents divorced and you walked through that storm, but that had nothing to do with you. It wasn't your fault. That can be a problem. Maybe there's something else relationally or something where it's not your fault. But what happens when it is your fault? You know, maybe the financial storm that you're going through is 100% because you just decided to spend money on your credit cards even when you didn't have income to cover it. All right? Maybe the financial storm is your fault. Maybe the financial storm, maybe the health storm that you're going through is your fault. Right? Maybe a little less McDonald's and a little more, Market Cafe. I don't know. And we find it difficult to actually sometimes, the storms that are our fault, we tend to go, well, God, why would God even help me with this? Right? I got myself into this. I'm going to get myself out of this. And often we won't give room for God in it. In fact, we think, why would God even care about this? He warned me. I mean, there's enough advice out there. Maybe it's a relational storm that you're in, and you just refuse to listen to the people around you who said, that guy, it's not the guy for you. But now you're in it, and now this is a storm, and you question whether God even cares. But God does care. And as Paul is saying this to the group of people who are on this boat, they made a horrible decision to go out in the storm. They made a horrible decision to set sail. There were warnings everywhere, even beyond Paul. The time of year meant that they shouldn't go, but they decided to go. And Paul says, you should have listened, but you didn't. And then he goes like this, "But now I urge you to keep your courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed." Well, how do you know, Paul? "Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me." God is with Paul in the storm. The God whom I serve sent an angel. Paul knew what it was like to physically be alone and spiritually rely on the God who stood beside him. This isn't the first occasion that Paul had experienced not being listened to, being in a storm not of his choosing. But he had a confidence that God was with him in the storm. He writes this to Timothy. This is Paul. Paul knows what it's like to be in a storm, and when you look at him, you would say he's alone. But Paul didn't do life alone. Paul did life with God. He says this, "At my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me." And then he says this, "May it not be held against them." Oh, I wish I was more like Paul. All right? No one came to my support, and everyone deserted me. My statement right after that would not be "forgive them." My statement would probably be, "and they will pay for that." But that's not Paul. And then he goes on to say this, "But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed to all the Gentiles, and all the Gentiles might hear it, and I was delivered from the lion's mouth." Do you know what Paul is actually saying there is 100% accurate? Because do you know what they were doing with Christians who were facing Nero and were found guilty of being part of the way? They used them in the circus, which was throwing Christians into a coliseum, setting lions loose so people could watch them be torn apart. And so when Paul is saying this, nobody came to support me, everyone deserted me, and I was about to be thrown to the lions in the circus. But God was there, and he delivered me. I know what it is to have God with me. Another spot, David writes this, "I keep my eyes always on the Lord. With him at my right hand, I will not be shaken." David, you can read about him. He had a lot of wilderness time as well. And he wasn't shaken in that wilderness time because he wasn't doing it alone. He was doing it with God. The disciples, another storm story. They were crossing the Sea of Galilee. A storm whipped up. Jesus was sleeping in the floor of the boat. And they all started to panic. We're all going to die. They wake up Jesus. How can you be sleeping? And Jesus says, "Peace, be still." And everything changed. Well, see, not everything, because they were still in the boat. They were still in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. It was just a different experience in the same circumstances. Peace, be still. You see, we think peace comes through circumstances, but the Bible tells us that peace comes through the presence of God in our circumstances. Peace is not the absence of a storm. Peace is found in the presence of Jesus Never let the presence of a storm cause you to doubt the presence of God. God is peace in the storm. God is peace in the valley. God is peace in the wilderness. So we go back to Paul on the boat. Last night, an angel of God to whom I belong and to whom I serve stood beside me and said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you." So keep up your courage, men. For I have faith in God, that it will happen just as he told me. You know why Paul had confidence in God? Because Paul had walked with God, because Paul trusted God, because God had delivered everything God said he would deliver. God had given Paul peace in every other storm he had experienced. And what I love about this is that Paul says, so keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God. He doesn't say to them that you have to have faith in God. I'm just telling you that I have faith in God, and because I have faith in God, I can bring peace to you in this circumstance. I have faith in God. When you enter the room, is it more peaceful? Do you bring peace into the circumstances you enter? Do you have faith in God? As we go on, nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. Paul doesn't say, don't worry, I have faith in God and nothing is going to happen. Paul says, don't worry, we're going to wreck this ship. There is going to be loss of goods and ship. But I have faith in God, because God has something for me to do. And he said, you're all going to make it. Paul describes his life. As I was saying, I think we have messed up theology about what it looks like to be walking with God, to be walking in faith, to be living the life that God called us to live to. We think it's supposed to be absent of storms. We think it's supposed to be absent of conflict. We think it's supposed to be quiet and peaceful. So now, you can decide whether that theology makes sense here, because that's what we talk about, or you can look at the life of Paul, who was probably the greatest example of what it is to be far from God and becoming close to God. And we can look at his life and say, okay, maybe that's what it looks like to be a Christian. Because this is what Paul's life looks like. He says, and he's talking to the church at Corinth, and there's conflict about whether Paul is, a good leader, or if what he's teaching is true. And he says, well, let me tell you why I believe what I'm telling you is true, because this is my life. This is what my life looks like. And he says, are they servants of Christ? I'm out of my mind to talk like this. Paul goes, this isn't what I want to brag about, but I want you to understand what life looks like. I am more. I have worked much harder. I've been in prison more frequently. Can you imagine if Steve said, so here are my qualifications for being your senior pastor? I've been in prison a lot. Right? I've been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. We just read about one. Boy, life with Jesus looks amazing, doesn't it? I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from the Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled, and I have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. On top of everything else, I worry about you. Are you in the storm? Good. Because that's exactly where God wants you. When Paul says to the group that is out in the storm with him, he doesn't say, okay, God spoke to me and everything's going to be fine. The sun will be up tomorrow and we will sail on to Rome. No. He just says, everything will be okay because God is with us. I have faith. If you only knew what I've been through before, you wouldn't think what I'm going through right now is such a big deal. God is with us in the storm. He is what I need. He is my safety. He is my strength. He is comfort. He is redeemer. He is sustainer. He is provider. He is assurance. And he is salvation. This travels with you through any storm you go through. This travels with you wherever you go. The peace is not the absence of a storm. Peace is found in the presence of Jesus. If you get nothing else out of what I'm saying here today, get that. Peace is not the absence of a storm. Peace is found in the presence of Jesus. Never let the presence of the storm cause you to doubt the presence of God. Look, a virgin will come, will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son. They will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. So my question is this. Are you alone in the dark? Because that's not how you were designed to go through the dark. It doesn't mean that you weren't designed to go through dark. It's just not how you were designed to go through the dark. And if you are alone in the dark, it is only because you have decided to travel alone in the dark. It's your choice. Because there is a God, a creator of you, whose desire is to be with you, to be walking with you. And he's not into just showing up and disappearing. He is life with you or not with you. And he calls you to walk with him in the storms, on the mountains, in the valleys, in the lush grass, and in the wilderness. You are not alone if you invite him in.